Hi everyone, welcome back to Brookdale Farm. Today we're just doing a service and a bit of work on the old Landcruiser, and I just thought I would, while I was doing it, show you how to change a rear wheel bearing on one of these. Now I've already loosened off the wheel nuts and jacked it up, the hydraulic jack here, and I've got a safety stand on it under it as well. Never work on a vehicle with it just sitting on the jack. It's too easy for them to fall off, and lots of people get hurt doing this. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is take the wheel off. Now this wheel bearing doesn't feel too bad. There's no movement in it when you shake the wheel around, but it is getting quite hot, so that's why we're changing it today. Well, we're going to take it apart and see what it looks like and probably change it. Once you've got the wheel off, slide it in under the chassis. That just gives you a bit more safety protection to stop the just in case anything falls off. Now on this one I know that the brake wheel cylinder is leaking a little bit too, so while we're in here we're going to do that. Okay, once we've got the wheel off, there is a screw that should be in here to hold the brake drum on, and then we have two jacking screw holes here. Before we can take the drum off, there is on the back of the drum, or behind the drum here, there's a little slot in here. Now this is where your adjuster is for tightening up your handbrake and making sure your brakes are nice and tight. You can get a screwdriver in there, and there's a little sort of notched cog in there that you can adjust with a screwdriver. Now you can only go one way with this. It's got a ratchet on it to stop you backing it off. To back it off, get a small screwdriver in, and it is down about where I've got this one now. I'm pushing against a spring. I can then get a second screwdriver in through this slot and use it to back off the ratchet mechanism. This screws your brake pads in as far as they go, and allows you to just simply pull the drum off. Okay, so I've got in there and I've backed them off as far as they will go. Now I can use a couple of long bolts. These are M8 thread, and screw them in here if the drum is stuck, and this will help to just push the drum off. But now we've done that, often if we just wiggle it we can pull the drum off. And what a filthy mess that is in there. I'm amazed these brakes were even working. That looks like it's been full of grease. It's obviously leaking a fair bit of oil in here. Anyway, we're going to get this hub off now, and because we need to do the we're going to change the wheel bearings, so we're going to pull this hub off, and that kit should have another seal in for here as well. So to get these cone washers off that are in here, we want, once we've taken the spring washer off, we want to just put the nut back on till it's level with the top of the bolt here, Ideally you want a brass drift to do this. I don't have one, but brass drifts are a good idea. And we just give this a tap like this, straight down. And that is often enough to just loosen up that that cone washer. Give it one more belt. That one's still a bit tight. Now I've got the whole stud coming out, but that's okay. Once you've got them out a little way, you can often get a screwdriver in the slot there and just open them up just a little bit, and that just helps you get them off. So there's the cone washer there. I'm sure there's a better way of doing it than that, but I haven't yet come across it. You can give them a tap on the side too, but sometimes you end up bruising your axle or your hub. That one worked a bit better. Okay, now there is a spot here to put a jacking screw again to pull your axle out, but I think this is already, maybe we need to put a jacking screw in. And then we can just pull the axle out like that. Okay, so there's 3 Phillips head screws in here that we need to undo now. And then this nut holding the bearings on just unscrews like that. So that's your hub nut. Bit of a funny looking thing, but that's how that comes off. And then we should be able to just pull the hub off. There's another heavy duty washer in here. So those 2 Phillips head screws we took out go through into these holes here to lock that nut in place. And there's a keyway on the shaft and there and a flat spot on either side so that this washer can't turn on there. And then there's the first bearing. Now there is an oil seal just in here as well, so this should not actually be full of oil. These bearings here should be greased. And there's another seal on the back here. and the rear cone bearings in there. I'm going to clean up all of this stuff and then we're going to reassemble it. So we've cleaned all of this up, and there's a few issues I've discovered. We have a seal in here, and this one is clearly leaking because this is how the gear oil was getting in here to cover everything in gear oil. This one is not included in the wheel bearing kit, and I thought they had all the seals in it. And the other thing is that this brake shoe here is really thin and pretty much worn out. Now this, with these shoes here, we have a single piston at the top here, and when this expands it pushes both these shoes out. Now when you are going forward, because of the rotation of the drum coming past this shoe in this direction, it tends to pull this one out a little bit more and up harder against the drum. So this is the one that works best when you are going forward. This one works best when you are going in reverse. So this one has very little wear on it. Obviously it does still give you some stopping power when you're going forward, because both of these get pushed against the drum, but really this one doesn't do much work at all to go forward. This one is the one that does all the work. So this one's the one that's going to wear. We're going to have to pull it apart again at some point and replace these and this, because it's all been covered in so much oil and grease. These brake shoes aren't going to be a lot of good anyway. It's very hard to clean all of that oil out. So we're going to put it back together with new wheel bearings in it, new rear seal, because that does come in the bearing kit. I will have to get this seal and put it in later because I need to drive this vehicle again tomorrow. So we're going to okay, so here's the wheel hub. We still have the seal in the back and the bearings in the back. The first thing we need to do is knock out the seal and the bearings and the two bearing cups which are in here, one at the front, one at the back. So we'll start by knocking out the front one. There's two little notches. You just get in here with a chisel and you can get that in the notch and just give it a tap. These are hard, so they will take the end off the chisel. Don't use your favourite best chisel on them. So there's the first cup. You can now get in and knock out the bearing and the seal on the back end. These bearings actually don't look as bad as I thought they were going to, but we'll replace them anyway. The same thing with the cup on this side. We can just knock this out as well. Yeah, these don't look nearly as bad as I thought they were going to. Anyway, I'm going to give this a bit more of a clean up and then we can start reassembling it. Okay, so we've cleaned this up. This is the bearing kit. Now these bearings are the same in the front and rear on these vehicles. So we get a few extra bits. Open this up. We've got the gasket to go on the back, and that's already been bent up while it's been in the box. We get the grease seal. Now this clip here is for the front, and so is this locking nut and the split pin. They all go in the front. And then we get the two bearings and cones. So we're going to start by putting in the outer bearing cone, which just looks like that. We drop it in like that. We need to try and keep it as square as possible. Then I like to use, sometimes I use the old cone as well, and a large socket. Now I don't have one that's quite big enough, so I'm definitely using the old cone to help drift this in, and we just tap it in, and we need to try and keep it nice and square. Now you can get special tools for doing this. I don't have one. If you've got the right tools, you can also use a press to put it in. That's not going in quite square, so we just need to tap it on this side a little bit. Okay, that's sitting down now. Just turn it over and tap the old brace back out again. Now we can turn it over and put the inner cone in. Now these are cone shaped, so you'll see it's fatter on that side than it is on the other side. The thin side always needs to point to face outwards so that you can get the bearings in. Okay, that side's in. Now for the really messy bit. Whenever I'm buying grease, I always get the marine grease. This is still a high temperature lithium wheel bearing grease, so it's suitable for all your brakes and stuff like that, but it's also has a lot more anti-corrosives in it than the non-marine grease. So we want to get a good dollop of grease on our hand, and we want to just work this into the bearing. So we want to get it, make sure we get it right through the bearing all the way around. So I'm just going to start on one side and work round, then turn the bearing over, and I'm just trying to work it into this gap here. And we want to make sure we work it right into the rollers. So if we just put some on our hand, this bearing's a bit large for me to do it with, but usually I can just stick my fingers in it, hold the inner still, and we just keep working it till we've got the grease in all the way through. You can get a special tool for this too, that forces the grease in. And it means you don't get quite so much all over your hands. Once we've worked that full of grease, we can put a bit more on the race in here. And we can drop that bearing in. Now while our hands are all greasy, I'm just going to do the outer bearing as well. Okay, so the next thing to put in is this seal here. Now, normally you can see a little spring on one side of it or the other. This one's really hard to see it on. It's tucked up in there. And the spring side of the seal always goes in the direction you are trying to hold the grease. So the spring is on the inside, on the bottom side. Now we just want to tap this in gently and evenly with a block of wood across it, just to spread the load a little bit. If it's a smaller seal, you can use a socket like we did before too. That works fine, but these seals are bigger than any socket I've got. Okay, this bearing can go in this side. And that hub is ready to go back on now. So back down on our axle again, we've cleaned all of this up. We're just going to give that a little bit of a wipe down, make sure it hasn't got any more dust on it. I'm just going to smear a little bit of grease on here where the bearings sit, so that they slide into place nice and easily. A bit round the thread. And just a little bit on the sealing surface here. We don't want too much on here because it'll come out and get on our brakes again. Now we can slide our hub into place. Okay, next we can put our locking washer on, and then our nut for doing up the bearings. Now when we're done, that hole, that hole, that hole and that hole are threaded. We can put those Phillips head screws back in there. They need to line up with one of these four holes, and that's how the nut locks on there. Usually there's a cotter pin or something like that. This one's a little bit different. So we'll slide that on and down into place, and then screw this on. Okay, that feels pretty good. Now we've got our two locking screws to go back in. Okay, first one in. These two holes and these two holes are not quite on the same offset, so you, depending on whereabouts you are on the, sometimes these two will go in with the on the holes on the plate underneath, and sometimes these two will. A little bit more grease in here, and this will help a little bit to seal and stop the oil coming through quite so fast from the diff through this seal here. I'll have to try and get a new one of them on tomorrow and put that in. I am going to put a little bit of anti-seize on these bolts here so that I can get them off again next time I have to do this job. So hopefully that's going to be a little while. Next we put the gasket on. Okay, now we can slide the axle back in. We want to be careful not to damage that seal as we do this. Now there's an alignment dowel in the axle that needs to go into this hole here, and an alignment dowel in here that needs to come through this hole. We've got to wriggle the axle into the splines again. Now I'm also just going to put a little bit of anti-seize on these cone washers here before I put them into place. Hopefully that'll make them come out a bit more easily next time I need to pull them out, which will be next week. Then the spring washers and the nuts. When we're doing these up, if we just put it into first gear, that will stop the hub turning. Alright, here's the brake drum. It's ready to go back on now. If we look in here on the inside surface, this is a bit rough, but there's also quite a step in here. So this brake drum actually really needs to be machined when I put the new pads on too, or I need to get a new brake drum. Now there is written on the outside, max diameter 297 millimeters. So if I measure across in there, I can work out whether or not this can be machined or not. Most likely I will just price up a new one, and we'll see what that comes to. So we can put this back on now and put the wheel back on. Now that bit in the back that we backed off earlier is actually automatically adjusting. So as we use the handbrake, these will ratchet out and should self-adjust again, but we can get in that slot in the back with a screwdriver and just adjust them a little bit too. Often those ratchets wear out, which is why the handbrakes on a lot of these vehicles don't work that well, because that just needs to be adjusted. So we'll put the wheel back on, and we're done with this for today, and we'll get back to it with some more parts sometime very soon. Yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you've learnt something, and I hope to see you again next time. Thanks, bye.